Thank you very much, Emily. And we are very, speaking for, just because I'm older, I'm just going to say we are so happy to be here, and we're so happy to see you. I have to just tell you that the average age of my clothes, I figured this out on the subway, is about 16 to 18 years of everything, and that's an average. And I got stared at on the subway coming here because this is peculiar to see in a New York subway, whereas if I were in Nantucket, I would be invisible because this is natural coloration and nobody would even see me.
Camouflage.
Camouflage, exactly. Exactly. And I want to start with that because, Maggie, you grew up in Southern California. You are a Southern Californian. I did a little research, and I know that you went to Harvard, and it was really nice of Emily not to say the name. And then you lived on Nantucket for a year, is that right?
Yeah, for 8 months while I was writing seating arrangements, but it was October 1st through June 1st.
Off season.
So yeah, I've actually never been there in high season. I'm going tomorrow. It'll be my first time when there are people.
What made you want to set your first novel there?
Well, the instigating incident for the book in general, so I had this year after college where I lived in Boston with friends and didn't really know what to do with myself, and applied to graduate school kind of on a whim. So then I moved out to Iowa, and I was there, and I'd been there for maybe 6 weeks, I guess. And this friend of mine was on Nantucket riding his bike, wearing tennis whites, swinging a tennis racket. Like
I know him. I know that guy. Yeah.
And he got hit by a golf cart, which reversed onto the bike path, knocked him off his bike, richly deserved. And so his leg was cut open, and the guy who had been driving the golf cart waited with him, but wouldn't apologize. And this sort of like blew his mind, yeah, to this degree that was really interesting to me and really strange. And so I was like on the phone pretending to be a good friend, and I was really just like, this is so weird. Like, to him, it almost seemed like the world should no longer be turning because this man had the bad manners not to apologize. The character who became the main character. Then I workshopped the story twice at Iowa, and it just wouldn't work as a story. That kind of gave me the sense of possibility, so I just decided that after I finished at Iowa, I'd go to Nantucket and try and write it, which, like, in retrospect, was perhaps excessive. I don't really think you need to live on Nantucket for 8 months in the winter to, like, write a book set on an island, but that's the way it worked out.
But how many of you show very... Yeah, exactly. Okay, now, so the incident of your friend's bike accident was really what kicked off the novel,
yeah,
or the story. And Meter family, or did you? What was the process of enlarging the incident into a novel?
Yeah, so I really thought about it for almost 2 years about expanding monsters, and then he gives his daughter away, and it ends almost word for word the way the novel ends, but it's of fitting in like 300 plus and I just didn't know, like, when I got to Harvard, I had no idea what a WASP was. I had like some dim concept of preppiness, but in like school uniforms, nothing more than that. So it was sort of, I don't know, kind of coming up with that family or seeing families that I sort of processed into the Van Meter family was less a series of like aha moments than sort of a series of like moments. And when I first got to college, I remember seeing people with like the whale pants and the embroidered belts and just being like, I don't know what that means. Like, clearly it signifies something. And I feel like tonight I might finally get answers.
Names of his alcoholic sister-in-law, calls him Winnie a lot, or Winifred. Mm-hmm. Perfect, because she was drunk. Did you give him, what was his first name? Did you go that far?
Yeah, I sort of started collecting names, and it's down in Iowa City. I'm not sure where Win came from. With a friend to this really old school resort in Rhode Island. I can't remember, conditioning, kayak, and they had these these wooden plaques with like summer lawn bowling champions from starting in like the 50s. And I remember writing down a bunch of names just off.
At these clubs. It was absolutely good research for you. I wanted to talk about the concept of keeping score, because when Van Meter keeps score in kind of quiet and kind of very deliberate ways, he wants, without giving too much away, the novel starts with the pregnant daughter is about to get married. And so here is a WASP moneyed family they're not perfect. Things are already messed up when the novel begins, which I thought was actually a very bold move on your part. Usually people write about this world, especially people who weren't raised that way, want everyone to be rich and perfect and blonde and have Technicolor teeth. You didn't do that. You have a bride-to-be who's pregnant and exhausted, and a sister who's got a real mess in her life.
Yeah.
And a mother who's just very implacable, and a father who, while his daughter is getting married, really only cares about getting into a certain exclusive golf club that so far hasn't taken him. And his whole, he really thinks about getting into that club pretty much all the time. And he keeps score with other families. Why did they get in? Why are they holding up my application? Don't you feel like he was sort of keeping score throughout?
Yeah, I think he's been keeping score his whole life. And it's funny because people will ask me who my favorite character is in the book, and I'm always like, it's Win Van Meter. Clearly, he's the best character. And I think he's just, I feel a lot of compassion for him, because I think he has spent his whole life believing that if he follows the certain set of rules, like if somebody were to read the official Preppy Handbook and take it completely literally.
As many have.
Right?
And I never, that's fine with me.
I was telling Lisa that there were moments when I was writing this book when I had some question about what a preppy person would do in 1980. And the answer was always there. Like, that's why Win Van Meter drove a Volvo.
Right. Well.
But, I think he has spent his whole life thinking that if he does all the right things, he'll be happy, or he'll at least be content. And he sort of gets to in the book, he's 59, and he's sort of discovering that he's been barking up the wrong tree a little bit, and he really craves a sense of belonging, but instead of finding it with his wife or with his daughters, he's just trying to join enough clubs. Like, somewhere along the line, he's going to join the club that, fulfills him. So, in that sense, I feel like he's sort of doing the best he can. Like, he's not a malicious person, but he's just a misguided one. And
well, he was clubby all his life. Mm-hmm. His father taught him to be clubby. His parents were, as perfect wasps, very chilly, and he didn't really and his mother was sort of in bed with a hangover for about 75 years. So, which is also very accurate. So he, I guess that kind of approval, and also that sense of destiny that he had. Like, if I'm a member of SPE or Porcellian, mm-hmm. or whatever, your names for them, I'll get into, it'll set my life straight. Mm-hmm. Tell me and tell us what kind of research you did to create new club names, because there's an interesting acknowledgement in your book, and the names they felt real, and the club seemed real.
I named the Vespasian Club, which is a club in Boston, and it's the Somerset Club, basically. But my friend's boyfriend named the Ophidian Club, and in an instant, I'd been struggling for weeks to come up with some fake Final Club name, and kind of was going through stuff, and finally put it out there, and he was just like, oh, the Ophidian Club.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that.
And then I had a second club I needed to name, and he said, oh, the Myrmidon Club. And it was named that for a while, and then in copy edits, the copy editor was like, this is an actual club at Oxford, which I had no idea. And so we had to change it, but...
Does Ophidian mean something?
It's a snake. Yeah, it's a word for a snake, and so the fake club's emblem is a snake swallowing its tail.
Oh, which is why there's all the snakeabilia up there. And what about the Vespasian? Does that mean something?
Vespasian was a Roman emperor, so I think I was just going for like a classic.
It's so great.
Thing.
When I was in college, some friends of mine started the Alcestrian Club.
What does Alcestrian mean?
Having to do with moose, because we like the idea
Moose?
of a moose. And this was, when Abercrombie was Abercrombie, not when it was slutty moose people not wearing clothing. So it was, so we had a little moose logo, and people laughed at us. How about your experience with the clubs themselves, with the clubs in school and country clubs and the like?
I mean, so much of it's just culture shock, I guess. I think writing about a world that isn't your world can sometimes be simpler in a way, because you maybe notice more being sort of dropped into something as like a semi-adult. So growing up in Orange County, I guess I've been to a golf club. It's not the same. And then, going to Harvard. Okay, my ex-boyfriend isn't here.
Is that good or bad?
It's good for my candor.
Excellent.
So I dated someone from Greenwich who sort of, his family belonged to all these, his family belonged to all these clubs. He was in Final Club at Harvard, and it was sort of what I was alluding to before, just with the whale pants, but on this much grander scale, where I was like, clearly cold fish soup means something to you guys because it's everywhere, and like every club we went to, there'd be cold fish soup.
Nobody orders it, but it's always on the menu. Yeah.
Well, and I'd be like, okay, I'll try that, and then be like, ooh, really? So kind of through them, I went to a series of clubs, and I mean, I think the whole club world is really sort of seductive. Like, I understand, it's part of the reason why I like Win, like I understand that desire to feel like you belong and to go somewhere where you'll see people you know and people bring you food and newspapers.
But I'm thinking about the seductiveness of a club. I think what makes it seductive is that if you're in, you feel really selected, and it is a kind of acceptance, validation, and so on, because it's exclusive. But anyone who makes that the focus of his or her life strikes me as somebody who is a fogey. They could be a young fogey, but it's kind of fogey-ish, right? And only really that class of person would care that much about joining the Pequod Club.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's something deeply silly about it. Like, I remember going to a Porcellian Club garden party, and it was raining, so I adapted to the weather and wore, like, corduroy pants. and
People are going to walk out.
Oh, yeah, no, and my boyfriend was so mad at me because all the other girls were wearing little strapless dresses but with Wellingtons, and I just didn't know.
Well, that was their way of showing a sense of humor. A little sundress with wellies.
No, that was lost on me. I was, like, dressed for the weather. I don't know, and it was funny, like, freshman year, there was this guy who everyone called John Harvard because he was the most sort of aggressively preppy human. And, like, layers of pop collars and madras and all this. I thought he was really fascinating. And so looked him up in the freshman Facebook, which was, for another couple years, just actually a book. And turned out he was from Laguna Beach, California.
Oh, how funny.
And we were, like, fellow Orange Countyans together. And it was kind of one of those things where it's just like, the convert is the zealot.
Right. Right, always. There's a wonderful character. In a way, my favorite character is the foreign student who lives with, oh, also, your family, the children all went to Deerfield, known as Deerfield. You didn't change that name. and Deerfield, there's this exotic girl, this lovely exotic girl who, to me, is in a way the most compelling character because she has to straddle being foreign and also, her name is Dominique?
Dominique, yeah.
And Dominique has to straddle being foreign and also finds that her mother ambushed her suitcases the night before she flew to Deerfield and put corduroys and crew neck sweaters in, and she's really earthy and ethnic and, and yet as an athlete fits in and is a good friend to the Van Meter family, especially to Biddy.
Yeah, I think she's the character who I suppose I identify the most with, just as being sort of an outsider. And I think she is, in the book, sort of a breath of fresh air. And
yes.
When we were editing, she was one of the characters I was asked to amplify, I think for that reason, just as relief. But
Prep relief.
Yeah.
It can get to be much. It can. I know.
And I think, too, I mean, this is something I'd be interested in hearing how it's been for you, because for me, writing this book in some ways was safe because, no one in my immediate family is going to recognize themselves in this book. It's sort of a world that's, a lot of my friends have kind of one foot in and one foot out. But, I mean, with being sort of the prep guru, do you feel, is there an awkwardness to being sort of the authority, or are you just comfortable with it?
Well, there was a tremendous amount of awkwardness and kind of Alfred E. Newman, who me, in 1980, but that was, at least a century ago, and it stuck to me, and I grew to be the person who got a lot of mail saying, mail, in envelopes with stamps, I love your book. We may get a Labrador Retriever. Here are the 6 names we're considering. Or which is preppier, Deerfield or Choate? Or do you think the parties are better at Amherst or at Dartmouth? I mean, I feel like I have been that person, and I put it on like an old sweater now. And I do have a much easier time making those recommendations to strangers than, of course, deciding what to eat for dinner any night, because it doesn't go into a deep place. I can sort of get some information and help people and be the generous giver that I am. But I also take it with a grain of salt. I grew up in Manhattan. I'm Jewish. I went to private schools from the time I could walk, but I had an outsider-inside view. And in private school in New York, everyone is kind of preppy, whether they're Jewish or not. But it was in college that I met my first 2-collar man. And that was something. It was here, and there was another one, and then I met a 3-collar man, and that's what got me sort of fascinated with this really intense John Harvard type.
I thought you had to go to the UK to find 3-collar men.
No. You can even find them in Rhode Island. I wanted to ask you about alcohol. There's a lot of, first of all, I'd like to ask you if you have any that you could share, and secondly, knowing the alcohol plays a big part in the novel, as well it should, to keep things accurate. How much do you think to the world, and your experience with the family that isn't here tonight, how do you think preppies self-medicate and rely on alcohol to be the disinhibitor that it is, and also as the excuse for any bad behavior? That's a lot of questions.
I mean, I feel like the answer to all of them is just a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I think I grew up in a culture where drinking was pretty low key. Like my dad was sort of my dad's a lawyer, come home from work and have his 2 Coors Lights. But I never saw my parents drink hard alcohol. My grandparents drank a lot of hard alcohol, but they're kind of the generation where they're like, we survived World War II, we're just going to party for the next as long as we live. And then, yeah, I guess at college, that was part of it too, the sort of cocktail culture and seeing people in my parents' generation be drunk, like really drunk, for the first time was sort of startling and humanizing in a way and interesting to me. But I think too, in my family, we're kind of a Norwegian family, so we're not particularly effusive either. So some of that felt really familiar, and that was actually kind of my trajectory with the whole preppiness thing too, is once I kind of started to figure out what was going on with the whole aesthetic code and everything, I sort of thought, oh, this is where I was supposed to be, because I never felt at home in Southern California growing up, and just the way various things are manifested, like wealth, and what's sort of prioritized, it didn't work for me. And so then kind of getting into the preppy world, I thought, oh, I go to an Ivy League school, I'm proficient at racket sports, like
I'm so proud.
I was really drawn to it. And the slight repression that gets medicated with alcohol also seemed familiar to me, if slightly in a different outfit, I guess.
Well, and also because this is a wedding weekend, it's one party, one reception after another. There's always a half full bottle of champagne that someone grabs to take, as preppies do on an island, driving somewhere, and so on. There's a lot of interest in marine life in the book. Are you a big marine biology person?
I'm obsessed with the ocean, yeah. I don't know, I read a lot of sailing memoirs. I don't sail.
Something's happened to you, I think. Setting your novel in Nantucket, living there for 8 months.
Yeah, I'm really drawn to islands. I spend a lot of time around the ocean. I mean, that's sort of the embarrassing thing about being a writer, is that before too long, you just expose all your preoccupations to the world. And
right. Well, every book is autobiographical to an extent, because you can make room for an idea or a notion you've had about something, and throw it in there and give it to one of your characters.
Well, yeah, hopefully you're interested in what you're writing about, so the things you're interested in. Like, it's all I can do not to have every short story I write be like, and then it fell into the sea.
There's that very, very, very visual, graphic scene with the dead whale and the brother who pierces it.
Yeah.
How did you know what that would be like?
So this is a real thing that happens.
I figured.
And when I was in high school, maybe junior high, there was some tiny little stub article in the LA Times about a scientist who'd been doing a necropsy on a whale and just cut into it at the wrong place, the wrong time, and it blew up, and he died. He was impaled on a shard of whalebone.
Ooh.
In this grisly explosion. And so I remembered that, as you would, and then it sort of surfaced in my brain when I was on Nantucket. I started writing the book, and I sort of thought, oh, I'm sure there'll be a way I can work in an exploding whale. And sure enough, there was. And if you go on YouTube, there are exploding whales, and some are, there's just something so grotesque about a dead whale just because of the sheer size. And so sometimes they die on the beach, and people blow them up with dynamite just to break up the mess. But other times they'll just spontaneously explode. There's a video of a dead whale being taken on a flatbed truck through Taiwan, and at some point it just ruptured from the gases. So I was just drawn to that as sort of a way that's the natural world and the mess of the natural world could sort of intrude on this very manicured place and this manicured weekend.
Filled with messy people.
Right.
With messy problems.
Yeah.
Another smart choice that you made. I see that we should wrap up, or we'll take questions from the audience, but I have one last question for you about the grandmothers. Now, in many cultures, grandmother is a person who gets a great deal of respect and for whom everyone yields. In this family, the grandmothers have very cute, preppy nicknames, and they're just pains in the neck. Did you observe that in any up-close research you did? And it was interesting. They're just those grandmothers are kind of high maintenance.
Yeah, they are. Well, I stole both of their names from my friend Bailey's family, and she has a Mopsy and an Otzi. And her maternal or paternal grandmother was one of Jackie Kennedy's bridesmaids. She's a pretty stellar specimen, and so she is the source of the bullshot, the drink that's in there. She drinks and is indeed cold beef vodka soup. But she's also very different from those characters because she has this incredibly flamboyant wardrobe, and Bailey's always going through her closet and finding like zebra print like jumpsuits and just crazy. Everything's bedazzled and crazy. So to an extent, they were really invented, and I haven't had grandparents for a long time. So I sort of, I put them in there as having sort of a chilling effect, and maybe people who are sort of leaving the spotlight with slightly less grace than would be ideal. Yeah.
Well, I thought they worked, and they made me laugh. And actually, although there's a lot of pathos in the book, I thought ultimately it's a very funny book. But maybe just because, I mean, there's a lot of humor in the book. Is that okay to say?
Yeah.
Good.
So at this time, if you guys have any questions for Maggie and Lisa, I'd love to take a couple. Anybody out there?
We know all you guys.
Have either of you had the chance to consult with young people entering the preppy lifestyle? And what do you tell them if they're entering, like Hotchkiss or something? That's a school, right?
Yeah. I have had the opportunity and, shall I say, the responsibility of helping people adapt. What can I say about that?
Do people send their children to you in boxes? And be like,
they haven't yet, but I wouldn't put it past them. Sometimes, I have to say though, last time I did a personal appearance, I wore a beige dress and a blue jacket, and the jacket was from the boys department of Brooks Brothers, and I thought I looked very nice and very prepped up, and everybody was disappointed that I wasn't more colorful, which is why and the sunglasses on my head, as if I could be invited to a dock reception any second. But people do. I mean, that's why I wrote True Prep, was to sort of update you to the 21st century and how to get into it now in a world gone so wrong that where do you start in a TMZ Kardashian world? What is a person to do, really?
Well, I think that's what's so charming about True Prep is the sort of inclusiveness to it. But the matter-of-fact inclusiveness, all right, it's no longer about being white and straight. It's
right.
It's the aesthetic is sort of the starting point.
I think you're right. It was a very important notion to make it very open and say you don't have to be from any kind of background whatsoever to be preppy. And there were some really unpleasant things written about True Prep on the Amazon site by people who felt I had really opened it up in a way that was disgusting. And how dare I? And then my favorite notes on those notes were, how dare that Birnbaum, I don't know, Greenbaum, Goldberg person write these things? And I thought,
Ben Gurion.
yeah. And then they'd usually mention Ralph Lipschitz, and I think, oh, okay, right, all right. So I don't want to be part of that world that, you know, Princeton's been co-ed a long time. And even old Princetonians have gotten over it. So I think it's bad manners to keep people out. But I do think it is very aesthetic, and it's also very safe. It's so easy. As I said, these clothes are 18 years old. There's nothing expensive about it or inaccessible.
Cool. Does anybody have another question up there? Okay.
I was wondering why Nantucket wasn't identified as Nantucket when all of the other communities were identified and institutions of, you know, the ones that we saw that we had heard of.
Yeah, such as Deerfield. Yeah, so I had initially started writing it, naming Nantucket as Nantucket. And really, the reason I didn't keep it that way is that people get so attached to the places where they summer. And just use summer as a verb for the first time tonight. And I knew that if I called it Nantucket, everyone would get mad at me if I had a church on the bluffs where there is no church on the bluffs, and if you could see the golf course from places where you couldn't see the golf course. So I really did it just to be more flexible, and also to sort of avoid the temptation of naming actual roads and things like that, which just becomes a mess. And I think it's been a good change because people tend to read it as wherever they summer. So I've seen people read it as Maine or read it as Connecticut or whatever, and so maybe it's made it a little bit more universal. But yeah, sheer laziness is the reason.
It's true, you're right. People get very stuck. And I once gave a book to a friend, a very gripping book about a real-life crime, and he said, oh, they got the name of the tax form wrong in the first chapter, so I threw the book away. And some people are just so wedded to the actual literal thing that they can't jump in and play in your playpen.
Yeah, I called it Weskeke. I just looked online. I looked at lists of words in Native American languages from sort of the Cape and Islands, and I think it's a Wampanoag word, and it means whalebone. So it's just to keep the whale theme going, I guess.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question.
Would you ever consider coming back to this same subject matter for a future project?
No.
Short and
There's
sweet.
There's a rumor that you are close to finishing another novel?
Yeah, so close. We're finishing the last round of edits actually now, just in the next few weeks, but it's about ballet, and starts in the 70s and sort of in New York and Paris and Southern California, so I write about Californians a little bit more. But yeah, I tend to write about different things, so prep chapter is over.
Well, you did a great job. And you really got the nut, you know? I'm really impressed.
Coming from you, I mean, that means a lot.
Well, wonderful. Thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you, Maggie and Lisa, especially.